Hey, it's Steve. Let's talk about resilience, especially when it relates to career and business. As we've been going through this coronavirus situation together, I've noticed that, of course, some people are really thrown off kilter by it. Maybe they've lost their jobs, or maybe their business went south, and it's really hard for them to adapt. They think the game's over now, um, and they have a hard time recovering from that. Whereas other people I know, especially friends of mine, in fact, a lot of them are thriving during this time. I'm thriving during this time as well. Like it's been one of my best years ever, financially and business-wise. And what I've noticed as a difference in the patterns between these two groups of people is their level of resilience, particularly with respect to how quickly and easily they can pivot. When your old path dies, it's important, of course, to accept that and then come up with a solution to go a different direction. You can't just keep stewing over the old dead path. It's not coming back, at least not anytime soon. It's over and done with. You can't just rely on the government to save you. It's up to you to change course, change direction, to find new opportunities. And every time there's a change that happens, it's an invitation to grow in a different direction. It's an invitation to seek out and find new opportunities. And the people I've noticed who are very resilient and they're good at pivoting, they're doing just that. They're pivoting. They're saying, okay, offline is dead. Let's go online. Or this kind of business model is dead now. It's not going to work for a while. Maybe next year it'll come back, but it's going to be a while. Let's go this direction. This career path is dead. Let's try this one. And what I've noticed, though, is that one of the things that makes them good at pivoting without being overly stressed by the experience is that they practiced this in the past. They've had the opportunity to pivot, and they've done it multiple times before. And so when an experience comes up like this that throws people for a loop, you didn't predict that this was going to happen last year, and then it surprises you, even if it comes on somewhat gradually, you're still surprised by it to some extent. You can look back to your past and say, well, I pivoted here, I pivoted there, I pivoted there. Each time I changed what I was doing, changed my business model. And so I can handle this situation as well. Makes you more confident knowing that you can be resilient, knowing that when life throws you a curveball, you can just change your approach and flow with it and not have it destroy you, not have it break you down or make you feel any less confident. Think about it in terms of like, how did you figure out what kinds of food you liked when you were younger? If you ate a very limited diet growing up, then you may become an adult who only likes certain foods. Have you ever met somebody who's a super picky eater? They only eat a small range of foods, which are the ones they were familiar with growing up. But whereas if someone else has been exposed to a wide variety of foods, all different kinds of ethnic dishes, and they've tried, foods from all these different cultures, different fruits and vegetables and so on, and just a wide range of foods growing up, you'll probably find that when it comes to eating, they're a lot more resilient because they found a lot more they like, or at least they found a lot more that they can handle. And so they're less likely to be thrown off kilter by, okay, their favorite foods aren't available. Well, they can eat this stuff over here. Then that's fine too. I've noticed that, even with being vegan, there's a wide range of foods I like because I've tried so many different variations of the vegan diet, macrobiotics, raw foods, high carb, low carb, just all different kinds of ways of doing the diet that it feels very resilient to me. I can always pivot to some variation of eating vegan wherever I am. It's actually pretty easy. I felt less resilient when I was a meat eater because I would eat a narrower range of foods. So if my favorite ones weren't available, I felt like, oh, now I'm feeling uncomfortable. I don't feel as confident about my choices. I don't know how to make these types of things. What do I do? It's the same with life in general. If you explore more variety deliberately, you build yourself into a more resilient character. And by having a more resilient character, you can handle change more easily without losing confidence and without feeling overly stressed. So as I went through my career path in life, I deliberately tried to develop a wider variety of skills because I just recognized that the future is uncertain. There's going to be a lot of change, and I need to get good at handling change. And that will actually be better for me in life. Instead of just betting on one track that may die, I should explore multiple skill sets and multiple types of tracks so that however the world changes, even if all the tracks I've explored before all die off, I have built the skill of knowing how to change tracks, of knowing how to learn something new, of how to get good at something new. And then that is what gives me confidence. It's not about trying to guess where the future is going. It's about actually practicing pivoting. So, some of the skills I developed career-wise were programming skills. I started out being a computer game programmer. Design skills, like designing computer games. I can do audio and video editing when I need to. Writing, I've written millions of words of published content. I've written a book that got published. Doing public speaking, making videos, doing social media. I've done podcasting. I've created online courses. I've created online communities, including discussion forums, and managed those. I've done coaching. I've done lots and lots of interviews. I've done live workshops, say 3-day events. So having just this wide range of experience is cool to rely on those skill sets. So I can pivot from one thing to another if I need to. A lot of people have been pivoting to doing online events. Great, can do that too. But what really makes the difference is just the experience and the practice of pivoting again and again and again and again, and realizing you can start off in a whole different field. You can start off with a new skill set, build up quickly, learn the basics pretty quickly, and get up to speed and actually start using the new skills productively. So the benefit here is that you really want to get good at learning and adapting and exploring. Pivoting, having the ability to pivot, makes you more resilient, but not having the ability to pivot makes you more fragile. So if you're in the place of having a very fragile relationship to your career path or your skill set or your current way of generating income, and that gets threatened, you feel overly stressed. If, however, you develop a broad base of experience with pivoting multiple times just to get good at it, then when an income stream gets threatened or a career path gets threatened, it's not a threat to you personally. It's not a threat to your lifestyle. It's not really a threat to your livelihood. If anything, it's kind of exciting. You can actually get to the point where you've pivoted so much and you've gotten so good at it that the whole rest of the world may seem like it's crumbling around you and everybody's freaking out. And you're like, well, this is no big deal to me. You almost want more stimulation from having more risk because it can be kind of exciting. It actually gets easier, maybe even too easy, when you pivot so much that you just get really used to it and you think, okay, I can lose everything I've got. My whole career path can be destroyed. All my income streams can be turned off, and I'll just be going off in some new direction the next day and get right back to where I was before. It won't be that difficult. So the key, though, I think, is that not pivoting and having that fragility is a problem of scarcity. It's part of the scarcity mindset. And when you're in that scarcity mindset, you have to deal with the problems of scarcity. One of the problems of scarcity is that when your income stream gets threatened, when your career path or your skill sets get threatened, as they might become obsolete or they might not be available for a while, you might not be able to leverage them, you feel personally threatened by it. That's scarcity thinking. Abundance thinking is when you realize, okay, that's not a threat anymore. I can pivot. No matter what happens, I'll find some other path. I've done that before. I can do it again. It's not really that big a deal. Now you graduate to the problems of abundance. The problems of abundance are not such where you have to worry about how you're going to make a living. That's kind of like easy to figure out once you know how to pivot. Now instead, you can focus on other aspects of life, like why don't I help the people who are still in scarcity? Why don't I express myself more creatively? Why don't I stretch myself in other ways? Why don't I focus on my relationship and social life? Why don't I invest in my health? Why don't I invest in making a better world? Why don't I dive deeper into my expression of life purpose, or figure out what I really want my relationship with this life to be going forward? You get to work at the level of bigger questions because you're not worried about these career level and income level pivots. You figure, okay, I'll handle that. It won't take a week to shift directions. Not really that big a deal. So this is really a key difference between living at the level where you're immersed in the challenges of scarcity, where you're always freaking out about, how am I going to pay my bills and what am I going to do career-wise? How am I going to make a living? And you get to realize that whatever happens there, you'll figure it out. It's not really going to be that big a deal, and you can spend the bulk of your time focusing on a different level, regardless of what happens in the world. You just feel like, hey, change is going to happen. Sure, and a pandemic might arise. Sure, something else crazy and different might arise in the world, but you'll pivot. Your skill sets will shift with you. You'll be able to do that, and you can still stay focused at dealing with the challenges of abundance. What you may not realize, though, is that I would say, I've been in the scarcity phase for much of my life. Most of my 20s were spent in that phase. The challenges of abundance are actually harder. The challenges of scarcity are easier. It's harder to think about how am I going to contribute. It's harder to think about how do I express myself creatively. These are harder questions to ask and to answer. It's harder to think like, what is my life purpose? What am I really here to do? How can I make a difference in the world? These are tougher questions to answer than asking questions like, how am I going to pay my bills? What do I have to scramble to do next? What should I invest in next to get my income back up again? How am I going to deal with this debt? Those are actually easier questions. I'd say they're less interesting questions, but they're easier. They're simpler. They're not as complex. They don't have as many possible answers, perhaps. So if you want to graduate from scarcity to abundance thinking, I actually think it helps to prepare yourself for the greater level of challenge of having to deal with the questions of abundance, of actually being willing to invite that into your life, of saying, like, I would rather not have to deal with, problems like how am I going to pay my rent or my mortgage? How am I going to scramble to, find a new job or a new business model, and be willing to graduate to bigger and even scarier, deeper problems. Facing the bigger picture of life, facing these more dynamic, growth-oriented challenges that really challenge you to the core of, who are you and what is the nature of this reality? Dealing with those big picture issues. If you want to engage with life on that level each day, then invite it. Then basically say, look, I want to graduate from these scarcity level challenges, and I want to move into the challenges of abundance. I think that will help. That I found helpful for me when I started seeing the puzzle there for what it was, and I realized I'm keeping myself in this busy work of scarcity because the stuff on the abundance side is actually scarier. It's actually more difficult. And when I could get to the point where I said, okay, I'm ready for that. I want to invite that. I don't want an easier life. I want a harder life. I think people get stuck in scarcity when they see abundance as a path to an easier life. If you keep framing it like that, I think you will stay in the scarcity side. If you instead see abundance is not an easier life, it's a harder life. It's a more challenging life, but it's also a more growth-oriented life, and you can invite that. That, I think, is great. And in fact, that aligns with doing the work of actually practicing and pivoting a lot, because that's part of the path of exploring life. It's part of the path of exploring personal growth. It's harder to practice pivoting a lot. It's harder to let go of a business model that's actually working and you say, I've already learned this, I'm going to go move on to something else, even though it's lucrative. And you abandon it and you say, okay, I'm not going to use that income stream anymore because it's boring to me now. I'm going to go for growth. I'm going to go for new experiences. I'm going to go embrace the risk, even though I don't know how that's going to pan out. It's harder to do that, okay? But in the long run, I think it pays off much better. It's much more rewarding to deal with the problems and challenges of abundance than to constantly be stuck with the somewhat boredom of the problems on the scarcity side. Again, I think the problems on the scarcity side are just not as interesting. They are easier, though. If you explore the pivoting and you explore personal growth in the long run, it really does draw you over to the abundance side more, because in order to explore pivoting, you have to be pretty growth oriented. You have to want to become a more resilient character. And one of the gifts, or even punishments, you could say, of becoming a more resilient character is you get to deal with more difficult problems. You get to deal with more responsibility. Do you want that extra responsibility? Do you want to take on problems and challenges like that? If so, then I would say start inviting it. Start inviting the problems and challenges of abundance. Realize your life will not get easier. It will probably get harder. And be willing to graduate from scarcity's problems and challenges to the bigger problems and challenges of abundance.